She can't play that." The words cut through the champagne-soaked air like a blade. Victoria Ashford's voice dripped with condescension, her perfectly manicured hand gesturing dismissively toward the woman standing by the Steinway grand piano. "I mean, really, look at her." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Cruel, sharp laughter that bounced off the crystal chandeliers and marble floors of the Grandview Estate ballroom. 200 of the city's wealthiest citizens draped in designer gowns and custom tuxedos, their collective net worth exceeding small nations, all united in a single moment of shared amusement at the expense of one woman. Lorraine Hayes stood perfectly still. Her hands, weathered from decades of work, rested at her sides. The simple navy cardigan she wore over a modest dress seemed to absorb the glittering light around her, making her almost invisible among the peacocks. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple bun. No jewelry adorned her neck or wrists. No expensive shoes clicked against the floor. She didn't belong here. Everyone could see that. But something flickered in Lorraine's eyes as she looked at the piano. Something that had been dormant for 30 years. Something that whispered of a different life, a different woman, a different dream. "Well," Victoria's voice rang out again, expectant. "We're waiting. You did say you could play, didn't you?" The crowd pressed closer. Phones already raised, ready to capture what they assumed would be an embarrassing spectacle. A woman who didn't know her place about to be humiliated. Entertainment for their evening. Lorraine took a single step toward the piano, then another. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat echoing with memories she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself they weren't real. The bench creaked slightly as she sat down. The ivory keys gleamed under the lights, patient and waiting. She lifted her hands, fingers trembling almost imperceptibly, and positioned them over the keys. In that moment, everything hung in the balance. A lifetime of sacrifice, 3 decades of silence, the dignity of a woman who had endured too much to let mockery break her now. Victoria leaned toward the woman beside her, her stage whisper deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. This should be amusing. She probably can't even read music. But what happened next would wipe the smile from Victoria's face. What happened next would silence every voice in that room. What happened next would prove that you should never ever judge a person by their appearance. Because Lorraine Hayes had a secret, a gift, a story that none of these people could have imagined. This is that story. 6 hours earlier, the Grandview Estate had been a flurry of preparation. The annual Autumn Arts Gala was the social event of the season, a fundraiser that pulled in millions for the city's struggling arts programs. Or at least that's what the invitations claimed. In reality, it was an excuse for the wealthy to see and be seen, to network, to show off their latest acquisitions, both material and human. The estate itself was a monument to excess. Built in the 1920s by a railroad baron, it sprawled across 15 acres of manicured grounds, its limestone facade gleaming white against the backdrop of ancient oaks. Inside, no expense had been spared. Italian marble floors, French tapestries, a chandelier in the main ballroom that had once hung in a Viennese palace. And at the center of it all, positioned like a throne, sat a Steinway Model D concert grand piano, worth more than most people's homes. Victoria Ashford had chaired the event for 7 years running. At 52, she was the queen of the city's social scene, her influence extending into every corner of high society. Old money married to new money, she wielded her wealth like a weapon, her charity work more about power than philanthropy. She decided who was in and who was out, whose reputation could be destroyed with a whisper whose business could be saved with a word. Tonight, she was resplendent in a gown that cost more than some car's champagne. In one hand, her social dominance unchallenged. The guest list read like a who's who of the 1%. CEOs, politicians, old money families whose names adorned museum wings and university buildings. Everyone who mattered was here. Everyone except the people the charity was supposedly helping. The evening had begun with cocktails at 6. By 7, the guests were seated for dinner, a 5-course meal prepared by a chef flown in from New York. By 8, the auction was underway, with items ranging from vacation homes to private jet hours to dinner with a senator. Money flowed like the champagne, each bid higher than the last, less about the items themselves than about the display of wealth. The piano sat unused, decorative, beautiful but silent, a prop in the theater of the rich. No one had played it all evening. It wasn't that kind of party. This was about being seen, not about art. The musicians hired for the evening were tucked away in a corner, providing ambient background noise that no one really listened to. But the piano waited, as if it knew what was coming. Lorraine Hayes had never intended to come inside. She'd been hired by the catering company, one of dozens of workers who made events like this possible, but remained invisible to the guests. At 62, she'd worked more jobs than she could count. Housekeeper, caregiver, office cleaner, whatever paid the bills. Tonight she was helping in the kitchen, washing dishes and preparing plates that would be carried out to people who probably wouldn't finish half of what they were served. The pay was decent for a night's work. $50 cash, enough to help with the electric bill that was overdue again. She'd arrived at 4 to help with the setup, entering through the service entrance like all the other workers. The staff was kept separate from the guests, of course. Different entrance, different hallways, different worlds. She'd spent the first few hours in the industrial kitchen, hands in soapy water scrubbing expensive plates that would be used once and discarded. But during a break, curiosity had gotten the better of her. She'd heard about the Grandview estate, seen pictures in magazines, but she'd never been inside the main house. And something had pulled her toward the ballroom. Maybe it was the sound of laughter. Maybe it was something else. She'd slipped through a service door, intending only to peek, to see this world she'd only glimpsed from the outside. The world she'd once been promised before life had other plans. The ballroom had taken her breath away, not because of the chandeliers or the marble or the designer gowns, but because of the piano. She'd seen it immediately, as if a spotlight had been shining on it just for her. The Steinway, black and gleaming and perfect. She'd moved toward it without thinking, drawn like a moth to flame, until she stood just a few feet away, close enough to see her reflection in its polished surface. Her hands had begun to tremble. Not from fear or cold, but from memory, from longing, from the ghost of a girl who'd once believed she could conquer the world with 88 keys and 10 fingers. She hadn't noticed the crowd noticing her, hadn't seen the way conversations had paused, the way eyes had turned toward this woman who so clearly didn't belong. She'd been lost in the past, in dreams long abandoned, in a grief so deep she'd learned to live with it like a chronic illness. "Excuse me." The voice had snapped her back to reality. A server, young and nervous, had touched her arm. "Ma'am, you can't be in here. Staff isn't allowed in the main ballroom during the event." Lorraine had nodded, apologetic, and turned to leave. But in that moment, Victoria Ashford had spotted her. "Wait." Victoria's voice had carried across the room, commanding attention, as it always did. She'd glided over her entourage, following like satellites. "Who are you?" I work in the kitchen." Lorraine had said quietly. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come in here." "No, you shouldn't have." Victoria had looked her up and down, taking in the simple clothes, the worn shoes, the working hands. "But since you're here..." A smile had played at her lips, the kind of smile that preceded cruelty. "You seem quite interested in the piano." Lorraine hadn't answered. She'd felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on her, felt herself shrinking under the scrutiny. "Do you play?" Victoria had asked, and there was something in her tone, something that said she already knew the answer or thought she did. Lorraine had hesitated. She should have said no, should have apologized again and left. Should have returned to the kitchen, where she belonged, to the world where people like her stayed invisible. But something in her, some ember that had never quite been extinguished despite 3 decades of trying, had made her meet Victoria's eyes and say, "I used to." The crowd had laughed, polite at first, then louder. The idea of this woman in her discount store cardigan and sensible shoes playing the magnificent Steinway was apparently hilarious. Victoria's smile had widened. "Used to? How charming. Well, we'd love to hear you play, wouldn't we?" The crowd had murmured agreement, sensing sport. This was better entertainment than the hired musicians. "Really, I should get back to work," Lorraine had said. But Victoria had already taken her arm, guiding her toward the piano with a grip that was firm despite its gentleness. "Nonsense. We insist, don't we?" Victoria had looked around at the crowd playing to them, and they'd responded with encouragement that masked anticipation of disaster. Lorraine had found herself being positioned at the piano, Victoria's hand on her shoulder, pressing her down onto the bench like a teacher with a reluctant student. "Now then," Victoria had said, stepping back with a flourish. "What will you play for us? Chopsticks, twinkle, twinkle, little star." More laughter. Cruel and cutting. Lorraine had looked down at the keys. Her hands had hovered over them, not quite touching. And in that moment, 30 years had fallen away. She'd seen herself at 18 at the conservatory, preparing for the performance that would have changed everything. She'd felt the weight of dreams that had died before they could bloom. "I could play Rachmaninoff," she'd said quietly. "Piano Concerto No. 2, if you have the sheet music." The laughter had stopped for a moment. Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto was notoriously difficult, one of the most challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. For someone to even suggest it was either delusional or, "You're joking," Victoria had said, but something in her voice had shifted. Uncertainty had crept in. "I don't need the sheet music," Lorraine had added. "I know it by heart." The room had gone quiet. This was unexpected. The woman was either about to embarrass herself spectacularly or... No, that was impossible. Look at her. "Well then," Victoria had said, recovering her composure. "Please, enlighten us." She'd turned to the crowd. This should be something to remember. And that's when she'd said it. The words that would hang in the air for the rest of the evening. The words that would haunt her for years to come. She can't play that. But Victoria was wrong. Dead wrong. Because she didn't know who Lorraine Hayes really was. She didn't know the story behind those weathered hands. She didn't know about the girl who'd once been called the most promising young pianist in a generation. Lorraine Marie Hayes had been born in 1962 in the poorest neighborhood of the city. The kind of neighborhood where dreams went to die, where potential was crushed under the weight of poverty and circumstance. Her father had worked at the factory when there was work. Her mother had cleaned houses. They'd lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and thinner hopes where the electricity sometimes got shut off and dinner was sometimes just bread and butter. Music had not been part of the plan. Art was a luxury for other people's children. For kids like Lorraine, the plan was simple. Survive, get through school, get a job, repeat the cycle. But when Lorraine was 7 years old, everything changed. The community center, one of the few places in the neighborhood that offered anything beyond despair, had received a donation. An old piano. It was battered and out of tune. Several keys stuck. The bench wobbled, but to the children who gathered around it, it might as well have been treasure. Most of the kids had pounded on it for a few minutes before losing interest and moving on to basketball, or whatever else caught their attention. But Lorraine had stayed. She'd pressed one key, then another, listening to the sounds they made. There was something about it, something that spoke to her in a language she didn't yet understand, but recognized all the same. The community center director, Mrs. Patterson, had noticed. She'd been a music teacher before budget cuts had eliminated her position, and she still volunteered when she could. She'd watched this little girl with the serious eyes and the gentle touch, and she'd seen something. "Would you like to learn?" Mrs. Patterson had asked. Lorraine had nodded, unable to speak, past the hope that had suddenly bloomed in her chest. For the next year, Lorraine had gone to the community center every day after school. Mrs. Patterson had taught her the basics: how to sit, how to position her hands, how to read the strange symbols on the page that somehow translated into sound. Lorraine had absorbed it all, like a sponge practicing on the broken-down piano, until her fingers ached, until Mrs. Patterson had to force her to stop and go home. "You have a gift," Mrs. Patterson had told her parents one day. A real gift. She could be special. She could be great. Lorraine's parents had been skeptical. They loved their daughter, but they were practical people. Music was nice, but it didn't pay bills. Still, they'd seen the light in their daughter's eyes when she played, and they'd wanted her to have something, anything that made her happy. By the time Lorraine was 10, she'd outgrown what Mrs. Patterson could teach her. The old woman had called in every favor she had, begged and pleaded, and finally found a real piano teacher willing to take Lorraine on. Professor James Whitfield, who taught at the university, who usually only worked with advanced students, had agreed to hear her play. Lorraine had been terrified that day. She'd worn her Sunday dress, the only nice thing she owned. Her mother had braided her hair. They'd taken 2 buses to get to Professor Whitfield's studio, a room that seemed impossibly grand, with its polished grand piano and walls lined with books and sheet music. "Play something for me," he'd said simply. Lorraine had played. She'd played the pieces Mrs. Patterson had taught her, and when she'd finished, she'd looked up at Professor Whitfield with hope and fear warring in her chest. He'd been silent for a long moment. Then he'd said, "How old are you?" "10, sir." "And you've been playing for 3 years?" "Yes, sir." He'd leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Young lady, I've been teaching piano for 35 years. I've worked with hundreds of students, some of them quite talented. But what you have," he'd paused, "what you have is rare, special. With proper training, you could be exceptional." Lorraine's mother had gasped. Lorraine herself had felt tears prick her eyes. "I can't pay you," her mother had said quickly. "We don't have money for lessons." Professor Whitfield had waved his hand dismissively. "I don't want your money. Teaching a student like this is what I live for. We'll find a way. Scholarships, grants, whatever it takes." And so Lorraine's real education had begun. The next 8 years had been a dream. A beautiful, impossible dream. Professor Whitfield had been true to his word. He'd taught Lorraine for free, had found sponsors to pay for sheet music and performance clothes. He'd entered her in competitions, had pushed her to practice harder, to dig deeper, to find the emotion beneath the notes. And Lorraine had bloomed. At 12, she'd won her first competition, a regional contest for young pianists. The judges had been stunned. Here was this girl from nowhere playing with a maturity and depth far beyond her years. She'd played Chopin, her small hands navigating the complicated passages with a grace that seemed impossible. At 14, she'd performed with the city's youth orchestra, a solo performance that had earned a standing ovation. The newspaper had run a story, "Local Girl's Piano Prodigy Shines." There'd been a photo of her at the piano, her face serious with concentration, her hands a blur on the keys. At 16, she'd won a full scholarship to the city's prestigious conservatory. It was almost unheard of a girl from her neighborhood with her background being accepted into a program that usually drew students from wealthy families who'd been groomed for music careers since birth. Her parents had been so proud. Her father had framed the acceptance letter and hung it in their tiny living room. Her mother had cried and told her she was going to do great things. Professor Whitfield had told her she could be one of the greats. That with her talent and work ethic, she could perform at Carnegie Hall, could record albums, could teach at the finest music schools in the world. The future had stretched before her, bright and limitless. Lorraine had practiced 6, 7, 8 hours a day. Her fingers had developed calluses. Her back had ached from the hours at the bench. But she hadn't cared. This was what she was meant to do. This was her purpose, her calling, her gift. At the conservatory, she'd flourished. She'd studied under the best teachers, had learned theory and composition alongside performance. She'd made friends with other students who understood her passion, who spoke the language of music fluently. She'd been happy in a way she'd never imagined possible. In her senior year, everything had come together. She'd been chosen to perform at the conservatory's annual showcase, a prestigious event that drew talent scouts, critics, and representatives from major concert halls. She'd been asked to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with the conservatory orchestra. It was a piece she loved, had practiced for years, knew in her bones and blood. The performance was scheduled for April 15th. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. A scout from the New York Philharmonic would be there. A recording contract was being discussed. Her career was about to launch. April 15th. The date had been circled on her calendar in red. The date that would change everything, but not in the way she'd expected. March 27th, 19 days before the performance, Lorraine's father had collapsed at work. The call had come while she was in practice. The conservatory secretary had interrupted her, had told her she needed to go to the hospital immediately. Lorraine had run still in her practice clothes, her heart pounding with fear. At the hospital, the doctor had delivered the news with clinical efficiency. Massive heart attack. Her father had survived barely, but the damage was extensive. He'd need surgery, rehabilitation, constant care. He wouldn't be able to work again. Her mother had been there, looking smaller than Lorraine had ever seen her, her eyes red from crying. "We'll figure it out," she'd said, but her voice had held no conviction. Over the next week, reality had set in with brutal clarity. Her father's medical bills were astronomical. Their insurance bare-bones coverage from the factory covered only a fraction. Without her father's income, even that meager amount, they couldn't pay rent. They were going to lose their apartment. Lorraine had tried to focus on her music on the upcoming performance. This was her chance. This was everything she'd worked for. But every time she sat at the piano, she'd thought about her parents, about what they'd sacrificed for her. Her mother, who'd taken on extra cleaning jobs to pay for her first pair of performance shoes. Her father, who'd worked double shifts so she could attend summer music camps. They'd given her everything, and now they had nothing. The conservatory had offered help, but it wasn't enough. There were programs, sure, but they moved slowly, and the bills were due now. Professor Whitfield had given her money from his own pocket, but it was a drop in an ocean of debt. Lorraine had spent sleepless nights trying to find a solution, some way to do both, to perform to launch her career and still help her family. But the math didn't work. The timing didn't work. The world didn't work that way. 3 days before the performance, she'd made her decision. She'd gone to Professor Whitfield's studio, the place that had been her sanctuary for 8 years. He'd known immediately, had seen it in her face before she'd said a word. "Don't," he'd said. "Lorraine, don't do this. I have to," she'd said, and her voice had been steady, even though her heart was breaking. "They need me." There will be other performances, he'd said, desperate. Other opportunities. This isn't the end. But they'd both known it was. Chances like this didn't come twice. The scout wouldn't return. The recording contract would go to someone else. The door that had been open would close, and it wouldn't open again. "You have a gift," Professor Whitfield had said, and his eyes had been wet. "You're supposed to share it with the world. That's your responsibility. Your gift isn't just for you." Lorraine had thought about that. About responsibility, about gifts, about what we owe the world and what we owe the people who love us. And she'd realized that maybe her gift wasn't music at all. Maybe her gift was love. The ability to love her parents more than she loved her dreams. The strength to sacrifice the thing she wanted most for the people who'd sacrificed everything for her. "I'm withdrawing from the conservatory," she'd told him. "I've already spoken to the administration. I'm taking a leave of absence." A leave, he'd said, grasping at the word. "So you'll come back?" She hadn't answered. They'd both known the truth. She'd gotten a job that same week. 2 jobs, actually. Cleaning offices at night, working at a grocery store during the day. The money had been enough to move her parents into a smaller, cheaper apartment. Enough to start chipping away at the medical bills. Enough to survive. She'd told herself it was temporary, that she'd go back to music once things stabilized. That this was just a detour, not a destination. But temporary had a way of becoming permanent. Her father's recovery had been slower than expected. He'd needed her. Her mother had developed diabetes, had needed her. There was always something. Always a reason to wait just a little longer, to put the dream on hold for just a few more months. Months had become years. Years had become decades. She'd stopped playing piano. It hurt too much, like pressing on a fresh bruise. The few times she'd sat at a public piano somewhere in a mall or a hotel lobby, her hands had shaken so badly she couldn't play. The grief had been overwhelming, the sense of loss too acute. So she'd put it away, locked it in a box deep inside herself. The girl who'd been a prodigy, who'd been destined for greatness, who'd had the world at her fingertips. She'd locked her away and become someone else. Lorraine Hayes, the woman who cleaned offices and took care of elderly people and worked whatever jobs would pay the bills. A woman without a remarkable past or a promising future. Just someone trying to get by like millions of others. Her parents had eventually passed away. Her father 6 years ago, her mother 2 years after that. They'd thanked her with their dying breaths for taking care of them, told her they were proud of her, told her they loved her. She'd never told them what she'd given up, never wanted them to feel guilty. Her sacrifice had been her gift to them, and she'd given it freely. But now at 62, she was alone. No husband, no children, no career. Just memories of a girl who'd once believed she could be special. The piano had become something she avoided. When she saw one, she looked away. When she heard classical music, she changed the station. It was easier that way. Easier than remembering what had been lost. Until tonight. Until the Steinway at the Grandview estate had called to her like a voice from the past. Until Victoria Ashford had challenged her in front of 200 people. Until the choice had been laid before her one more time: stay invisible or step into the light. Just once more, one last time. What harm could it do? And so Lorraine found herself back in the present moment, sitting at the piano bench, Victoria's words hanging in the air like an executioner's blade. She can't play that. The crowd pressed closer, phones raised ready to capture the disaster. Social media posts were already being composed in people's heads. This would be something to talk about at brunch tomorrow. The delusional woman who thought she could play Rachmaninoff. Lorraine looked down at the keys. Her hands hovered above them, trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of memory. The last time she'd played this piece, truly played it, she'd been 18 years old in a practice room at the conservatory, preparing for the performance that would never happen. She could feel every eye in the room on her, could hear the whispers, the barely suppressed laughter, the anticipation of her failure. Part of her wanted to stand up, apologize, and leave, to return to the safety of invisibility, to the life where she didn't risk, didn't hope, didn't dream. But another part of her, the part that had been silent for 30 years, was waking up, stretching, rising. That girl she'd been, the prodigy, the dreamer, the one who'd believed music could change the world, was still in there somewhere. Buried, but not dead. Sleeping, but not gone. Her right hand moved first, index finger extended, touching middle C. The note rang out pure and clear in the hushed ballroom. A single note, but in that note, Lorraine heard everything. Her father's laugh, her mother's prayers, Professor Whitfield's patient corrections, the community center's broken piano, the conservatory's grand halls. 30 years of silence. She pressed another key, then another. Not the beginning of Rachmaninoff yet, just random notes, her fingers remembering the feel of ivory and ebony, the slight resistance of the keys, the way the sound responded to the pressure of her touch. The crowd shifted restlessly. When would the embarrassment begin? When would she reveal herself to be the fraud they knew she must be? Victoria leaned toward a woman next to her. "I almost feel bad for her," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. But honestly, she brought this on herself. Lorraine closed her eyes, breathed, remembered. She remembered being 7 years old, pressing that first key at the community center. The sense of discovery, of finding something that fit her like a key in a lock. She remembered Mrs. Patterson's gentle encouragement. "You have something special, child. Don't let anyone tell you different." She remembered the first time she'd played for Professor Whitfield. The terror and excitement mixed together. The way he'd looked at her after she'd finished, like he was seeing something rare and precious. She remembered the competitions, the concerts, the practices that lasted until her hands cramped. The pure joy of finding the perfect interpretation of a phrase, of making the piano sing exactly the way she heard it in her head. She remembered her father in the hospital, his hand in hers, him telling her to go to play, to live her dream, her refusing, him crying because he understood what she was giving up. She remembered the last time she'd touched a piano with serious intent. 10 years ago, maybe more. A piano in a department store, shiny and new and available to anyone who walked by. She'd sat down, had tried to play something simple, but her hands had shaken so badly she'd hit wrong notes, and a child had laughed, and she'd stood up and walked away, vowing never again. Never again had become tonight. Lorraine opened her eyes, looked at the keys, at her hands weathered and worn but still strong, at the expectant, mocking faces surrounding her, and she decided, just this once, just this one time, not for them. Not to prove anything to Victoria Ashford or anyone else in this room, but for herself, for the girl she'd been, for the dream she'd sacrificed, for her parents who'd believed in her, for Professor Whitfield who'd seen her potential, for every hour she'd practiced, every competition she'd won, every moment of joy music had given her before life had demanded its price. Just this once she would play. "I'm waiting," Victoria said, her tone sharp with impatience and amusement. "Or perhaps you've realized you're in over your head." Lorraine didn't respond. She was beyond words now. She adjusted her position on the bench, finding the exact angle she needed. Her feet positioned themselves on the floor, automatic muscle memory from decades of training that had never quite left her body. She placed her hands over the keys, fingers curved exactly as Professor Whitfield had taught her all those years ago. "The fingers are an extension of your heart," he'd always said. "Let them speak what words cannot." A woman in the front row nudged her companion. "This is painful to watch," she whispered. "Someone should stop her." But no one stopped her. Lorraine took one more breath. In her mind, she heard the opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, the famous opening, the bells-like chords that announced something momentous about to begin. She'd performed this piece dozens of times in her mind over the past 30 years. In the quiet moments before sleep, in the long hours of menial work, in the empty spaces of her life. She'd played it in her imagination, her fingers moving invisibly, the music silent but real. Now she would play it for real. One last time. She thought about Sergei Rachmaninoff himself, how he'd written this piece after years of depression and writer's block, how it had been his comeback, his redemption, how he'd poured all his pain and hope and fear and triumph into these notes, how the piece was about overcoming, about rising from darkness, about refusing to stay silent. She thought about all the great pianists who'd performed this concerto, legends whose names lived on in recordings and concert halls. She'd never be one of them. Her name would never be spoken in the same breath as theirs. But right now, in this moment, she would share something with them. The same notes, the same passion, the same need to express something too big for words. "Well?" Victoria's voice cut through Lorraine's thoughts. "Are you going to play or not?" Lorraine's hands descended to the keys, and the world changed. The opening chords exploded from the piano like thunder, not tentative or uncertain, but powerful, authoritative, commanding. The famous bells of the opening, the dramatic proclamation that something significant was happening, filled the ballroom with sound so rich and full that it seemed to come from somewhere beyond the instrument itself. The crowd's laughter died instantly, cut off mid-breath like someone had flipped a switch. The mocking smiles froze. The raised phones lowered slightly as hands forgot what they were doing. This was not what they'd expected. This was not an amateur stumbling through a piece beyond her ability. This was not a delusional woman embarrassing herself. This was something else entirely. This was mastery. Lorraine's hands moved across the keys with a fluidity that seemed impossible. The complex passages, the ones that took professionals years to perfect, flowed from her fingers like water. But it wasn't just technical proficiency. It was more than that. It was interpretation, emotion, understanding. She wasn't just playing the notes. She was living them. The second phrase came gentler, more lyrical, a contrast to the dramatic opening. Lorraine's touch lightened the keys, responding to her with perfect sensitivity. She wasn't thinking about her fingers or the mechanics of playing. She was thinking about the music itself, about what Rachmaninoff had been trying to say, about what she herself needed to express. 30 years of silence poured out through her hands. 30 years of grief, of sacrifice, of lost dreams, of quiet endurance. But also 30 years of love, of dignity, of strength, of survival. Every note carried the weight of her life, the story of who she'd been and who she'd become. The crowd stood transfixed. Some of them knew enough about music to recognize what they were hearing. Others just knew instinctively that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something real in a world of carefully curated facades. Victoria Ashford's face had gone pale. The smug confidence had vanished, replaced by shock. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked at Lorraine as if seeing her for the first time. As if the woman at the piano had materialized from thin air, replacing the invisible worker she'd dismissed moments before. Someone in the crowd whispered, "My God." Another person raised their phone again, but this time not to capture a failure. This time to record something beautiful, something true, something they knew they'd want to remember. Lorraine was unaware of all of it. The crowd had ceased to exist. The ballroom, the wealth, the judgment, all of it had fallen away. There was only the music, only the piano, only the conversation between her soul and Rachmaninoff's across decades and death, a conversation conducted in the universal language of melody and harmony and rhythm. Her eyes were closed now. She didn't need to see the keys. Her hands knew where to go. They'd always known. The training hadn't left her. The gift hadn't died. It had only been sleeping, waiting for this moment to wake up and remind her of who she really was. The first movement of the concerto typically lasted about 11 minutes. Lorraine was playing only the piano part without the orchestra, but she heard them in her head. The strings, the winds, the brass, all of it accompanying her invisible, but present. She knew every entrance, every dynamic change, every subtle shift in color and mood. And she played it all. The dramatic opening gave way to the first theme, lyrical and yearning. This was the part that had always moved Lorraine to tears when she was young. The melody that spoke of longing, of desire, of reaching for something just beyond grasp. Her right hand sang the melody, while her left provided rich, harmonic support. The balance was perfect. Neither hand overwhelming the other, both working in service of the music. This was what separated good pianists from great ones. The ability to make two hands sound like one voice, one heart, one truth. A man in the crowd, a music professor from the university, recognized the quality of what he was hearing. He'd performed this piece himself, had taught it to countless students, knew its challenges intimately. What this woman was doing was remarkable. Not just in terms of technique, though, that was impeccable, but in terms of interpretation. She understood the piece at a deep level. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story. He pulled out his phone and started recording. This needed to be documented. People needed to hear this. The music built to the first climax, the part where the piano and orchestra engaged in a passionate dialogue. Lorraine's hands flew across the keys, the complex passages executed with precision, but also with feeling. Every note had purpose. Every phrase had direction. She was building to something, taking the audience on a journey whether they wanted to go or not. And they did want to go. Despite themselves, despite their prejudices and assumptions, they were being drawn in. The music was breaking through their carefully constructed walls, touching something human and real that they'd forgotten existed beneath their designer clothes and expensive jewelry. A woman near the back started to cry. She didn't know why. She didn't even particularly like classical music, but something in the sound, something in the emotion, broke open a place in her heart that had been closed for years. She thought about her own dreams, the ones she'd abandoned to marry well and live comfortably. She thought about the artist she'd wanted to be before practicality and family expectations had steered her toward a different life. The music spoke to everyone differently. To some, it was a reminder of youth and passion. To others, it was a confrontation with the choices they'd made, the roads not taken. To still others, it was simply beautiful, inexplicably moving, like watching a sunset or holding a newborn child. Lorraine reached the development section where Rachmaninoff took his themes and transformed them, exploring different moods and colors. This was the most challenging part, technically demanding incredible control and stamina. Lorraine's hands moved with a confidence that belied the 30-year gap since she'd last seriously played. The muscle memory was there, but it was more than that. This piece was part of her. It lived in her bones. Her father had loved this concerto. She remembered playing it for him once, when she was preparing for the conservatory performance that never happened. He'd sat in their tiny living room, his eyes closed, listening. When she'd finished, he'd said, "Baby girl, when you play like that, I understand why God made the world. Because something this beautiful needs to exist somewhere." She played for him now, for his memory, for the man who'd worked his fingers to the bone to give her a better life, only to have his heart give out before he could see what she might have become. The first movement raced toward its conclusion. The final passage was a tour de force, demanding power and precision in equal measure. Lorraine gave it everything, her hands hammering the dramatic chords, her whole body engaged in the act of creation. The final chord rang out powerful and definitive. A statement, a declaration, a proclamation that could not be ignored. In a concert hall, there would be a pause before the second movement, a moment for the audience to absorb what they'd heard, for the soloist to prepare for what came next. But Lorraine didn't pause. She couldn't. If she stopped even for a moment, she might not be able to start again. The spell might break. She moved directly into the second movement. The second movement of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto was entirely different from the first. Where the first had been dramatic and passionate, the second was intimate and tender. It was one of the most beautiful slow movements in all of classical music, a melody so achingly lovely that it had been used in countless films and commercials, though few people knew its origin. Lorraine's hands gentled on the keys. The opening theme emerged like a whisper, like a secret being shared. This was music that spoke of love, of loss, of memories held close to the heart. This was music that understood what it meant to sacrifice, to let go, to carry on despite the pain. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a sound, except the piano. 200 people stood frozen, caught in the spell of the music. Some of them had tears streaming down their faces now. Others stood with their hands over their hearts, as if the music was physically affecting them. Victoria Ashford felt something crack inside her chest. She'd spent so many years being hard, being critical, using her wealth and power as weapons. She'd surrounded herself with beautiful things, but had forgotten what beauty actually was. And now this woman she'd mocked and belittled, was showing her something true, something real, something that money couldn't buy and cruelty couldn't touch. The melody unfolded slowly, patiently. There was no rush here. This movement was about letting emotions breathe, about sitting with feelings instead of running from them. Lorraine played with a tenderness that came from deep understanding. She knew what it was to love something so much that losing it broke you. She knew what it was to carry on anyway, to find strength in the broken places. Her mother had loved this movement. It sounds like a lullaby, she'd said once, like someone singing to someone they love. Lorraine had played it at her mother's funeral on the cheap keyboard at the church. It hadn't sounded like this, not on that inadequate instrument, but she'd tried to honor the music and the woman who'd given her life. Now she played it with the full resonance of the Steinway, and the difference was like the difference between a photograph and reality. Every nuance, every subtle shift in harmony, every delicate ornament was rendered with perfect clarity. The piano sang under her hands, its voice warm and human and impossibly moving. A young woman in the crowd, maybe 25, found herself thinking about her grandmother who'd passed away the year before. Her grandmother who'd always believed in her, who'd told her she could do anything, who'd loved her unconditionally. She missed her grandmother with a fierce ache, and somehow this music gave voice to that ache, made it bearable by acknowledging it, by saying, yes, this grief is real and valid and shared. An older man thought about his first wife, dead now for a decade. They'd been young when they married, poor but happy. She'd believed in him when he was, nobody had supported his dreams, had loved him for who he was, rather than what he might become. Success had come later, and with it a different life, a different wife. But in moments like this, he remembered what love had felt like before it became complicated. The music wound through them all, finding the tender places, the wounded places, the places they kept hidden even from themselves. It didn't demand or accuse, it simply acknowledged. You have loved, you have lost, you carry on. This is what it means to be human. Lorraine built the movement to its emotional climax, a soaring phrase that seemed to reach toward something transcendent. Her face was wet with tears, but she didn't notice. She was somewhere else, someplace beyond the Grandview estate, beyond the present moment. She was in every practice room she'd ever sat, in every stage she'd ever performed, on every dream she'd ever dreamed. The movement wound down, growing softer and softer, until the final notes were barely whispers. A gentle ending. A benediction. A reminder that even in sadness there was beauty. Even in loss there was meaning. The last note faded into silence. Lorraine let her hands rest on the keys for a moment, eyes still closed, reluctant to leave the place the music had taken her. But the third movement awaited. The finale. And she had come too far to stop now. As Lorraine prepared to launch into the third movement, something happened in the crowd. A man, maybe 60 years old, pushed his way toward the front. His face was flushed, his eyes wide with recognition. "I know her," he said loudly. "My God, I know who she is." People turned to look at him. Victoria, still caught in the emotional undertow of the music, frowned at the interruption. "That's Lorraine Hayes," the man said. "Lorraine Marie Hayes. She was at the conservatory. I was there. I remember her." A murmur went through the crowd. What was he talking about? "She was incredible," the man continued. "A prodigy. She was going to be famous. There was a showcase performance she was going to play with the orchestra, and then..." He trailed off, trying to remember. She disappeared, just vanished. No one knew what happened to her. He pulled out his phone, fingers fumbling as he searched. There were articles. She won competitions. She was supposed to be the next great American pianist. Victoria felt her stomach drop. No, this couldn't be right. This woman who cleaned dishes, who wore a cardigan from a discount store, who looked like nobody special, couldn't possibly be. The man found what he was looking for. An old newspaper article from 1980. The scan was grainy, But the headline was clear: local prodigy to perform with orchestra. Below it was a photo of a young black woman at a piano. The same high cheekbones, the same serious eyes, just 40 years younger. "That's her," the man said, showing the article to the people around him. Phones came out immediately, people taking photos of the article, searching for more information. The story spread through the crowd like wildfire. Word passed from person to person. She was real. She was legitimate. She wasn't some delusional amateur. She was, or had been, the genuine article. People looked at Lorraine with new eyes. Shock, confusion, shame. How had they not known? How had this woman been invisible to them when she'd been extraordinary all along? Someone found another article. Hayes withdraws from conservatory, published 3 days before her scheduled performance. No explanation given, just a brief mention that she'd taken a leave of absence for personal reasons. Personal reasons, the music professor murmured, understanding dawning. She gave it up. For family, probably. Medical bills, most likely. That's usually what it is. He looked at Lorraine with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. To have that much talent, that much potential, and to walk away from it. The sacrifice must have been unbearable. Victoria stood frozen, her earlier smugness replaced by growing horror. She'd mocked this woman, had belittled her, had invited humiliation upon someone who'd given up everything for the people she loved. The weight of her cruelty pressed down on her like a physical force, but Lorraine was unaware of the revelation spreading through the crowd. She had moved into the third movement and nothing else existed. The third movement of Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto was a complete contrast to the second. Where the second had been slow and introspective, the third was fast and brilliant. It was a display of technical virtuosity, of joy and energy and life affirming itself despite everything. This was the hardest movement, the most demanding. It required absolute control at high speed, the ability to maintain clarity and musicality even while the hands flew across the keys in a blur of motion. Lorraine launched into it with a ferocity that took everyone's breath away. Her hands became almost invisible, moving so fast that they seemed to multiply to be everywhere at once. The notes cascaded from the piano like water over rocks, clear and bright and unstoppable. This was music of celebration, of triumph, of refusing to be defeated. After the drama of the first movement and the tenderness of the second, this was the declaration that life goes on, that joy is possible, that the human spirit can endure. Lorraine played with a freedom she hadn't felt in decades. The technical challenges that would have daunted most pianists seemed to dissolve before her. Her hands knew what to do. Her body knew how to move. This was what she'd been born to do, and 30 years of silence hadn't changed that fundamental truth. The crowd watched in stunned silence, many of them now knowing who they were really seeing. Not a nobody, not a servant, but one of the great lost talents of a generation. A woman who'd sacrificed her gift so completely that she'd become invisible, and who now, for one night, was allowing herself to be seen again. People were recording now on every phone. This would be all over social media within hours. Lost piano prodigy emerges after 30 years. Humble woman shocks elite crowd. You won't believe what happened at this charity gala. But for now, in this moment, all that mattered was the music. Lorraine played the rapid passages with absolute precision. Every note clear, every rhythm exact. But it wasn't cold or mechanical. Even in the technical passages, there was warmth, personality, a sense of someone speaking through the music. The movement built and built, the energy intensifying, the momentum increasing. This was the musical equivalent of a sprint, and it demanded not just skill, but stamina. Lorraine could feel her arms beginning to tire, could feel the strain in her back from the intensity of the playing. But she didn't let up. She couldn't. Not now. Not when she was so close to the end. The famous passage arrived, the one that every pianist dreaded, where the hands had to cross back and forth at incredible speed while maintaining perfect clarity. Lorraine executed it flawlessly, her hands dancing across the keyboard with a grace that made it look easy, even though everyone who knew anything about piano understood just how difficult it was. A man who'd been a concert pianist before retiring leaned toward his wife. "I've heard this performed by some of the best in the world," he whispered. "She's as good as any of them, maybe better." His wife, tears streaming down her face, could only nod. The music raced toward its conclusion, the final section where the full orchestra would typically join the piano in a triumphant proclamation. Lorraine played both parts, the piano melody and the orchestral harmonies, making the single instrument sound like many. Her whole body was engaged now. Not just her hands, but her arms, her back, her core. She rocked slightly with the rhythm physically expressing what the music demanded. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her breath came fast. But her playing never wavered. This was everything. Every practice session, every competition, every dream, every sacrifice, every moment of joy and pain and love and loss, all of it pouring out through her fingers onto the keys, transforming into sound, into music, into something that transcended the individual notes and became pure emotion, pure truth, pure beauty. The crowd stood transfixed, barely breathing as the music built to its inevitable climax. The final section of Rachmaninoff's third movement was a test of everything a pianist had. It demanded power, precision, stamina, and above all, the ability to maintain control and musicality even when exhausted, even when the physical demands seemed impossible. Lorraine gave it everything she had left. Her hands thundered on the keys, producing a sound so full and rich that it seemed impossible it was coming from a single instrument. The Steinway responded to her touch with perfect resonance, every note ringing out clear and true. This was what the piano was made for. This was why it had been crafted with such care, why it cost a fortune, why it sat in this ballroom as a centerpiece. Not as decoration, but as a vehicle for moments like this. The ascending passages where the piano climbed higher and higher up the keyboard sparkled like fireworks. Lorraine's right hand flew over the keys, each note a perfect jewel, while her left hand provided a foundation of power and support. The balance was perfection itself. She was playing from a place beyond thought now, beyond technique, beyond training, beyond anything that could be taught or learned. This was pure instinct, pure emotion, the direct connection between soul and sound that defined the greatest musical moments. In the crowd, people were having experiences they'd remember for the rest of their lives. A teenage girl who'd been forced to attend the gala by her parents, who'd been bored and resentful all evening, felt something shift inside her. She'd taken piano lessons as a child, but had quit finding it tedious. Now, watching this woman, seeing what was possible, she felt a spark of something. Maybe she'd start again. Maybe there was something to this after all. An elderly man thought about his own life, about the compromises he'd made, the dreams he'd deferred, the person he might have been if he'd been braver, more willing to sacrifice comfort for passion. He looked at his wife, who he'd married for practical reasons rather than love, and felt a profound sadness for the life he hadn't lived. A middle-aged woman who'd spent her entire life trying to impress people, trying to climb social ladders, trying to be seen as important, suddenly understood how small she was, how insignificant all her striving had been. This woman at the piano, who had nothing, who'd been invisible just an hour ago, was giving them something more valuable than anything money could buy. She was giving them truth. Victoria Ashford felt her carefully constructed world crumbling. She'd defined herself by her position, her wealth, her ability to look down on others. She'd cultivated cruelty as a form of power, had found satisfaction in making others feel small. But now, facing the reality of what she'd done, who she'd mocked, the gift she'd nearly destroyed with her casual dismissiveness, she felt sick with shame. This woman had given up a career that would have made her famous, had sacrificed her dreams for her family, had lived in quiet dignity, working menial jobs, staying invisible, never complaining, never demanding recognition for what she'd lost. And Victoria had treated her like trash. The weight of that realization was crushing. Lorraine was unaware of all of this. She was lost in the music, in the final push toward the conclusion. Her arms ached. Her fingers felt like they were on fire. Sweat dripped down her face. But she kept going, kept pushing, kept giving everything she had. This was for everyone who'd ever sacrificed something precious. For every parent who'd put their children first. For every person who'd made the hard choice, the unselfish choice, the choice that hurt. This was proof that the sacrifice hadn't been in vain, that the gift lived on, that 30 years of silence couldn't kill what was truly alive. The music built to an impossible crescendo. Louder, faster, more powerful. Lorraine's hands hammered the keys with a force that seemed superhuman. The piano rang out, filling every corner of the massive ballroom, the sound bouncing off the marble and the chandeliers and the high ceiling, creating a cathedral of noise. And then suddenly the famous final passage arrived. The part that every pianist who'd ever played this piece remembered with equal parts exhilaration and terror. A rapid descent down the entire keyboard, ending in a series of powerful chords that brought the entire concerto to its triumphant conclusion. Lorraine's hands flew down the keyboard, hitting every note with perfect accuracy. The sound was like thunder, like waves crashing on shore, like the universe declaring its existence. And then the final chords. Powerful, definitive, absolute. The full weight of the piano, the full force of her emotion, everything condensed into these last moments. The last chord rang out into the ballroom. Lorraine held it, her hands pressing the keys with everything she had left, letting the sound resonate and fill the space. The Steinway sang the note, sustained and rich and perfect, and then slowly she released the keys. Her hands lifted. The sound faded softer and softer until it disappeared entirely into silence. Lorraine sat motionless, her hands in her lap, her eyes closed. She was shaking slightly, whether from exhaustion or emotion, or both, she couldn't say. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Every muscle in her body ached. But she'd done it. She'd played the entire concerto. Not just played it, but played it well. Better than well. She'd played it the way it was meant to be played, with every ounce of skill and passion and understanding she possessed. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the ballroom. Not a sound, not a movement. 200 people frozen in place, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Lorraine slowly opened her eyes, looked down at her hands, as if surprised to see them there. These hands that had scrubbed toilets and washed dishes and done 1,000 humble tasks. These same hands had just produced something transcendent. She looked up at the crowd for the first time since she'd started playing, saw their faces, the tears, the shock, the awe. And she understood that something had happened here tonight that went beyond music. Something had shifted in the room, in these people, maybe even in herself. The silence stretched on. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then someone started to clap. It started with one person, a single pair of hands coming together in applause, then another, then another. And then, like a dam breaking, the entire room erupted. The applause was deafening. It crashed over Lorraine like a physical wave. People weren't just clapping. They were shouting, crying. Some were on their feet immediately, others rising more slowly. But within seconds, every single person in that ballroom was standing applauding with an intensity that seemed to shake the very walls. "Brava," someone shouted. "Brava." The cry was taken up by others. "Brava. Brava." Phones were everywhere now, recording the standing ovation, the tears streaming down faces, the absolute pandemonium of emotion. People who'd come to the gala to be seen, to network, to show off, were completely undone, their careful facades shattered by what they'd just experienced. The music professor was weeping openly, his wife clutching his arm. In 35 years of teaching, he said to no one in particular, "I've never heard anything like that, never." The man who'd recognized Lorraine from the conservatory was shouting her name. "Lorraine Hayes. Ladies and gentlemen, Lorraine Hayes." People took up the name, chanting it. Lorraine, 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 Lorraine sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed. She'd performed before, had received applause before, but never like this. This wasn't polite appreciation. This was something primal, visceral. These people had been changed by what they'd heard, and they needed to express it, needed to release the emotion that had built up inside them. A young woman rushed forward and thrust a bouquet of flowers toward Lorraine. Where she'd gotten them, Lorraine had no idea, but she accepted them numbly, holding them like a shield. More people pressed forward, wanting to get close to her, wanting to touch her, to thank her, to somehow be part of what had happened. Security guards looked nervous, unsure whether to intervene, but the crowd wasn't dangerous. Just desperate to connect, to express something they had no words for. And then Victoria Ashford moved through the crowd. People parted for her, automatically habit and hierarchy, asserting themselves even in the midst of chaos. She walked toward the piano, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Shame, awe, regret, wonder. She stopped a few feet from Lorraine. The applause was still thunderous, but somehow in that small space there was a bubble of relative quiet. Two women facing each other. One who had everything. One who had nothing but a gift. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? How could she apologize for her cruelty? How could she make amends for the casual dismissiveness that had preceded what might have been the most profound musical experience of her life? Tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup. And she didn't care. She, who never showed weakness, who never admitted fault, who never let her armor crack, was openly weeping in front of 200 people. "I'm sorry," she finally managed to say, though her voice was barely audible over the applause. "I'm so sorry." Lorraine looked at her. This woman who'd mocked her, who'd set her up for humiliation, who'd embodied everything wrong with the world Lorraine had left behind. And she felt nothing. No anger, no desire for revenge, just a bone-deep exhaustion and a strange sense of peace. She nodded. A simple acknowledgement, acceptance without absolution. That was all she had to give. The applause continued. It would continue for 5 full minutes, though Lorraine would lose track of time. 5 minutes of standing ovation from people who'd started the evening thinking she was nobody and who now understood that they were the nobodies, and she was something far greater. Eventually, the applause began to fade, not because people wanted it to, but because human hands could only clap for so long. The sound diminished to scattered clapping, then to silence. But the energy in the room remained electric, charged with the residual emotion of what had just occurred. Lorraine tried to stand, but her legs were shaky. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Victoria, moving on instinct, reached out to steady her, and Lorraine accepted the help without comment. People crowded closer, everyone wanting to speak to her, to touch her, to somehow capture a piece of what they'd witnessed. The questions came in a flood. Where have you been? Why did you stop performing? Will you play again? Can I hire you for an event? Would you teach my daughter? Are you recording an album? The music professor who'd recognized her pushed his way through. Miss Hayes. I'm Professor David Chen from the conservatory. I don't know if you remember me. I was a few years ahead of you, but I heard you perform once at a student recital. You were remarkable then, but this... He shook his head, overcome. This was transcendent. Others pressed forward with their own memories, their own connections. People who'd heard of her, who'd read the articles about the promising young pianist, who'd wondered what happened to her. A woman produced her phone showing a grainy newspaper article from 1980. This is you, isn't it? The girl who was going to perform with the symphony. Lorraine nodded the evidence of her past life, suddenly materialized in digital form, passed from phone to phone as people took photos of photos as her story spread through social media in real time. Someone had already posted a video of part of her performance. It had been online for maybe 2 minutes and already had hundreds of views. The comments were pouring in. Who is this woman? This is incredible, I'm crying. How have I never heard of her? She needs to be on Ellen Grammy Award right here. The gala's organizer, a harried-looking man with a clipboard, pushed through the crowd. Miss Hayes, I apologize. I had no idea we would have asked you to perform officially if we'd known this is absolutely extraordinary. Please, can we get you some water? Something to eat? You must be exhausted. Lorraine accepted a glass of water gratefully. Her throat was dry, her hands still trembling slightly. She sipped slowly, letting the cool liquid ground her back in reality. A journalist from the local newspaper had somehow materialized. Miss Hayes, can I ask you a few questions? People will want to know your story. Where have you been? Why did you stop performing? Lorraine looked at the woman, at her eager expression at the recorder being thrust toward her face. The whole room was listening, waiting for her explanation, for the story that would make sense of what they'd seen. My father got sick, Lorraine said simply. Her voice was hoarse, tired, but clear enough for those nearby to hear. I had to withdraw from the conservatory to take care of him and my mother. Someone had to work to pay the bills. And that someone was me. The crowd absorbed this in silence. The journalist pressed on, unable to help herself. But you were so talented. Surely there could have been another way Grant's scholarship something? Lorraine smiled, but there was no bitterness in it, just acceptance of a truth long since made peace with. There wasn't time for that. When you're poor, when your family needs you, you don't have the luxury of waiting for the right opportunity. You do what needs to be done. A murmur went through the crowd. Some people nodded understanding. Others looked uncomfortable, confronted with realities they'd never had to face. I made my choice, Lorraine continued. And I'd make it again. My parents sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. The least I could do was be there when they needed me. Music was my dream, but they were my family. Victoria, still standing nearby, felt each word like a physical blow. This woman had given up fame, success, everything the people in this room valued for family, for love, for duty. and Victoria had mocked her for it. The journalist was scribbling notes frantically. "And you haven't played seriously since then. 30 years without performing." "I've worked," Lorraine said. "Different jobs, whatever needed doing. I stopped playing piano. It hurt too much remembering what I'd lost." She looked around at the ballroom, at the opulent surroundings. "I came here tonight to work, to help in the kitchen. I never intended—" She trailed off. "And yet you played Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto from memory after 30 years, with a level of skill that—" The journalist shook her head. "I've covered classical music for 20 years. I've never heard anything like that. The emotion, the technique, the understanding of the piece. It was masterful." Lorraine didn't know what to say to that. She'd played because she'd been challenged, because something in her had refused to stay silent, because for once, just once, she'd wanted to remind herself of who she used to be. Professor Chen spoke up. "The technique can be explained. She had extraordinary training, and that kind of foundation doesn't disappear. But the interpretation, the emotion that only comes from lived experience, from pain and loss and sacrifice." She played that piece tonight with an understanding that only comes from having truly lived. Others in the crowd were nodding. They'd felt it. The depth of emotion in the music. The way it had spoken to something real and true and human. Victoria finally found her voice. "Miss Hayes," she said, and everyone fell silent, wanting to hear what she would say. "I owe you more than an apology. What I did tonight, how I treated you, it was inexcusable. You've taught me something I should have learned long ago, that we see what we expect to see, and in doing so we miss what's really there." Lorraine met her eyes, saw genuine remorse there, genuine transformation. Whatever Victoria had been before tonight, she'd been changed by what she'd witnessed. "You don't owe me anything," Lorraine said quietly. "We're all just doing the best we can." The grace of that response, the absence of recrimination or anger, seemed to move the crowd even more than the music had. Here was a woman who'd been humiliated, who'd been mocked and challenged and set up for failure, and she held no grudge. She'd risen above it, not through anger or revenge, but through dignity and forgiveness. The next 20 minutes were a blur. People pressed business cards into Lorraine's hands. Offers poured in from every direction. The director of the City Symphony wanted her to perform with them. Not at some future date, but next month. They'd program a concert around her, feature her as the soloist. A recording company representative who'd happened to be at the gala wanted to sign her immediately. They could have an album out within 6 months. Classical music was making a comeback, and someone with her story, with her talent, would be a sensation. A concert hall manager wanted to book her for a solo recital. They'd fill the house, he guaranteed it. People would pay premium prices to hear her play. Music teachers wanted to study with her to understand her technique and interpretation. Universities wanted to offer her positions on their faculty. A filmmaker wanted to make a documentary about her life. Hollywood producers saw a movie in her story. Book agents wanted her to write a memoir. The attention was overwhelming. Lorraine stood in the center of it all, trying to process the sudden transformation from invisible worker to sought-after celebrity. 30 years of obscurity erased in a single hour. Victoria pulled her aside away from the crowd. "Miss Hayes," she said, "I meant what I said about owing you. I'd like to help if you'll let me. Not out of guilt, though God knows I feel that. But because what you did tonight reminded me why I started this foundation in the first place. Because of people like you, artists who deserve to be heard." She took a breath. "I'd like to establish a scholarship in your name, for talented students who have to choose between their art and their family obligations, so that maybe the next Lorraine Hayes doesn't have to make the choice you made." Lorraine looked at her, this woman who'd been her tormentor an hour ago, and who now seemed genuinely changed. "That's very generous," she said carefully. "It's not generous, it's necessary." Victoria's voice was firm. "And I'd like you to be involved, to help select the recipients, to mentor them, to be the person you needed when you were 18. Before Lorraine could respond, Professor Chen returned. "Miss Hayes, I've spoken with the conservatory. They'd like to offer you something. Not a scholarship this time, but a position. Artist in residence. You'd perform, yes, but also teach. Share your gift with the next generation. And you'd finally get the degree you never finished." The offers kept coming. A benefit concert to help pay off any remaining family debts. A premiere at the most prestigious concert hall in the country. Collaborations with famous musicians. Television appearances. Magazine profiles. It was everything she'd dreamed of 30 years ago. Everything she'd sacrificed. Being handed to her on a silver platter. But something about it felt wrong. Not wrong exactly, but complicated. Lorraine held up her hand, stopping the flood of offers. "Please," she said. "I need a moment." The crowd fell back slightly, giving her space. She walked back to the piano, sat on the bench. Put her hands on the keys, but didn't press down. Just felt them under her fingers, solid and real. What did she want? For 30 years, she'd told herself the dream was dead. That she'd made her peace with it. That she'd chosen family over ambition and had no regrets. And that was true. She didn't regret caring for her parents. She'd do it again in a heartbeat. But now, suddenly, impossibly, the dream was being offered to her again. A second chance. How many people got that? She thought about her father, about what he'd said the last time she'd played for him. "Baby girl, when you play like that, I understand why God made the world." She thought about her mother, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to pay for her lessons. "You have a gift, Lorraine. Don't waste it." She thought about Professor Whitfield, who'd believed in her when she was just a kid from a poor neighborhood. Your gift isn't just for you. But she also thought about the last 30 years. The work she'd done. The people she'd helped. The elderly woman whose house she'd cleaned and who'd told her she was like a daughter. The man she'd cared for in his final days, holding his hand, reading to him, making sure he wasn't alone. The co-workers who'd relied on her, who'd become friends, who'd shared their lives with her. That life had meaning too. Maybe it wasn't glamorous or recognized or celebrated, but it had value. She turned to face the crowd. "I'm honored by all these offers," she said. "Truly. But I need time to think. This is all happening very fast." Disappointment flickered across some faces, but others nodded, understanding. "I gave up music once because I had to," Lorraine continued. "If I come back to it now, I need it to be for the right reasons, not because of one night of attention. Not because people suddenly see me as valuable when they didn't before, but because it's what I truly want. Because I can do it without losing myself in the process." She stood up from the piano. "I've learned something over the last 30 years. That there are many ways to live a meaningful life. That dignity doesn't come from fame or recognition. That sometimes the most important work we do is invisible to everyone except the people we do it for." The crowd listened in silence, absorbing this wisdom from a woman who'd learned it the hard way. "But I also learned something tonight," Lorraine said, her voice stronger now. "I learned that the gift doesn't die. That 30 years of silence didn't kill what was alive in me. That maybe it's not too late to honor both parts of myself. The part that needs to create, and the part that needs to serve." She looked at Victoria. "I'd be honored to help with your scholarship program, to work with students who face the choices I faced. That feels right to me." Then she turned to Professor Chen. "And I'd like to talk more about the conservatory position. Not to reclaim what I lost, but to build something new. Something that honors where I've been and who I've become." Relief and joy spread across his face. But Lorraine added, I'm not interested in fame for fame's sake. I don't need to be on television or in magazines. I don't need a documentary or a movie deal. If I perform, it will be because the music needs to be heard, not because I need to be seen. She looked around at all the faces watching her. Tonight was a gift. You've given me something I didn't know I still needed. The reminder that who I was is still part of who I am. And for that, I'm grateful. But tomorrow, I go back to my life. And then, slowly, carefully, I'll figure out how to integrate this part of me back into the whole. The crowd erupted in applause again. Not as thunderous as before, but warm, genuine, respectful. This was a different kind of appreciation. Not for what she could give them, but for who she was. A person of integrity making choices on her own terms. Victoria stepped forward. "We'll do it your way," she said. "Whatever you need. The scholarship, the conservatory position, anything else. No pressure, no expectations, just support." Lorraine smiled, and for the first time that evening, it reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. As the evening wound down, as the crowd slowly dispersed, still buzzing with the experience they'd shared, Lorraine found a quiet corner to sit. Her whole body ached. The exhaustion was catching up with her. But underneath the tiredness was something else. A sense of rightness. Of completion. Professor Chen found her there. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the seat beside her. She nodded, and he sat down with a grateful sigh. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, two people who understood what music meant, what it cost, what it gave. "I was angry at you when you left," he finally said. "Not really at you. At the situation. At the unfairness of it. You were the most talented student we'd had in a generation, and life just took you. Life takes all of us eventually," Lorraine said, with a small smile. "The question is what we do with the time we have. You sacrificed your career for your family. That's incredibly noble. But Lorraine, I hope you know that you deserved both. You deserved to have your career and your family. The fact that you had to choose wasn't fair." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't fair, but life rarely is. We make the best choices we can with the information and resources we have at the time. I had a gift, but my parents gave me life. I gave them what I could in return. That exchange has its own beauty." Chen was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Do you regret it?" Lorraine considered the question carefully. "I regret the circumstances that forced the choice, but I don't regret the choice itself. My parents died knowing they were loved, cared for, not alone. That matters. Maybe more than Carnegie Hall would have." Maybe Chen said, "But you can have both now. That's what tonight proved. The talent didn't disappear, the gift didn't die. You can still share it with the world." "On my terms, though," Lorraine said firmly. "That's the difference. 30 years ago, I would have done anything to succeed, would have sacrificed anything. But now I know what really matters. And it's not fame or recognition. It's being true to yourself. Living with integrity. Making choices you can live with." She looked out at the ballroom, at the remnants of the gala. "These people, they see me differently now. An hour ago, I was invisible. Now I'm someone important. But I'm the same person I was at the beginning of the evening. The same person I was yesterday. What changed wasn't me. It was their perception." "That's a profound truth," Chen said, "and one most people never learn." "I learned it by being invisible for 30 years, Lorraine said. "There's a freedom in not being seen. You can observe, understand. See how the world really works when people think you don't matter. Tonight, these people were reminded that everyone matters, that the woman washing dishes might be more extraordinary than the person wearing diamonds." She smiled. That's the real gift of tonight. Not that I got to play again, though that was wonderful. But that maybe, just maybe, some of these people will think twice before dismissing someone based on appearance, before assuming that power and wealth equal worth, before forgetting that every person has a story, a struggle, a gift that might not be visible on the surface. Chen nodded slowly. You've become a teacher after all, just not in the way any of us expected. We're all teachers, Lorraine said. Every choice we make, every way we treat people, every example we set. We're teaching others what it means to be human. I hope tonight I taught something worth learning. As Lorraine prepared to leave, as she gathered the few belongings she'd brought with her and said her goodbyes, she found herself back at the piano one last time. The ballroom was nearly empty now. Just a few staff members cleaning up Victoria, speaking quietly with the event organizer, a handful of people still lingering, not quite ready to return to their ordinary lives. Lorraine sat at the bench, looked at the keys, and thought about what she wanted to say with her final moments at this instrument, in this place on this night that had changed everything and nothing simultaneously. She thought about the young girl who'd discovered this gift at a community center, about the teenager who'd won competitions and earned scholarships, about the young woman who'd made an impossible choice, about the decades of work and service and quiet dignity, about the woman she'd become who carried all those other versions of herself inside like nested dolls, each one valuable, each one necessary. And she played one more thing. Not Rachmaninoff this time. Something simpler. A hymn her mother used to sing. Amazing Grace. Her hands found the melody, played it softly, tenderly. The notes floated through the mostly empty ballroom, gentle and clear and true. The few people still there stopped what they were doing, listened. This was different from the earlier performance, less about virtuosity and more about heart, less about impressing and more about expressing. This was a prayer, a thank you, a goodbye to the old life, and a hello to whatever came next. When the final note faded, Lorraine stood, ran her hand along the piano's smooth surface one last time, whispered, "Thank you." Victoria approached. "You're leaving?" "I have work tomorrow," Lorraine said simply. "My regular job. Life goes on." "But surely it's important to me," Lorraine interrupted gently. "To not forget where I came from. To not let this change who I am. I'll explore these new opportunities, yes, but on my own timeline, in my own way." Victoria reached out and took Lorraine's hand. "You're a remarkable woman." "No," Lorraine said. "I'm just a woman who's learned that gifts come in many forms, that dreams delayed aren't always dreams denied, that the measure of a life isn't in the applause or the recognition, but in the integrity of the choices we make." She squeezed Victoria's hand. "But thank you for tonight, for the challenge that brought me back to myself. Sometimes we need someone to push us, even if their intentions weren't kind at the start." Victoria's eyes filled with tears again. "I'll be better," she promised. "I'll see people differently, really see them." "That's all any of us can do," Lorraine said. "Try to be a little better tomorrow than we were today." She walked toward the exit, her cardigan still slightly shabby, her shoes still worn, her appearance still humble. But something about her had changed. Not in how she looked, but in how she carried herself. There was a lightness there that hadn't been before, a sense of completion, of wholeness. At the door she paused and looked back one more time. At the piano, at the ballroom, at the place where she'd been challenged and had risen to meet that challenge. At the place where she'd proven, if only to herself, that the gift hadn't died, that 30 years of silence hadn't been the end of the story. And then she walked out into the night, into her life, carrying with her the memory of this evening and the promise of tomorrow. Lorraine's story didn't end that night. It couldn't. Stories like hers don't have tidy endings tied up with bows. Real life is messier than that, more complex, more ongoing. In the days and weeks that followed, she did take some of the opportunities offered to her. She worked with Victoria on the scholarship program, making sure it truly served the students who needed it most. She accepted the position at the conservatory, teaching a few classes while maintaining her other work. She performed a benefit concert, donating the proceeds to the community center where she'd first discovered music. But she also kept cleaning houses, kept taking care of people, kept living the life she'd built over 30 years. Not because she had to anymore, but because she wanted to, because that work had dignity too, because she'd learned that you didn't have to choose between service and art. You could honor both. The video from that night at the gala went viral, as these things do in the modern age. Millions of views, thousands of comments, people crying, inspired, moved. The story spread. Woman who sacrificed her dreams returns after 30 years. It became a feel-good story, shared and reshared, each telling, polishing it a little more, making it a little more perfect than the messy reality. But the truth of it remained. A woman had been invisible, and then was seen, had been silent, and then was heard, had given up everything, and then was given a second chance, not because she demanded it or even sought it, but because she'd had the courage to say yes when opportunity knocked one more time, because she'd been willing to be vulnerable, to risk failure, to step into the light, even when everything in her wanted to stay hidden. That's the lesson worth carrying forward. Not the specific details of Lorraine's story, but the universal truth underneath it. That it's never too late, that gifts don't expire, that the person you were is always part of the person you are, that dreams deferred can still bloom even decades later if you're brave enough to give them water and light. We all have gifts, all of us. Some are obvious, like Lorraine's ability to play piano. Others are quieter, less celebrated. The ability to listen, to care, to persist, to sacrifice without bitterness, to forgive without being asked, to live with integrity even when no one's watching. The question isn't whether you have a gift. You do. The question is whether you'll honor it, whether you'll let the world see it, whether you'll have the courage to be who you really are, even when it's easier to stay invisible. Lorraine could have said no that night, could have apologized and returned to the kitchen, could have let the moment pass and her gift remain hidden. And maybe that would have been fine. She'd already lived a meaningful life, already proven her worth in 1,000 quiet ways. But she said yes. And in doing so, she didn't just reclaim her own story. She reminded everyone who witnessed it, everyone who heard about it, everyone who watches that video or hears this tale, that we're all more than we appear. That beneath the surface of ordinary lives, extraordinary things wait to be discovered. So if there's something in you that's been silent for too long, some gift you've buried, some dream you've deferred, some part of yourself you've hidden, because life demanded sacrifice, because circumstances forced choices, because staying invisible seemed safer, easier, more practical. Maybe it's time to let that gift breathe again. Not necessarily in a grand gesture like Lorraine's. Maybe in small ways, a little at a time. On your terms, in your way. Because the world needs what you have to offer. Your particular voice, your specific gift, your unique perspective. And it's never, ever too late to share it. That's what Lorraine taught us that night at the Grandview Estate. Not just that she could play piano, though that was remarkable, But that courage comes in many forms. That dignity can't be taken away, only given up. That the measure of a life isn't in the applause, but in the quiet choices we make when no one else is watching. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe gives us a second chance to be who we were always meant to be. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something you'd forgotten, or inspired you to take a step you've been afraid to take, share it. Not because it's feel-good entertainment, though it is that, but because stories like Lorraine's need to be told, need to be passed on, need to remind us all that within each person, no matter how ordinary they may seem, something extraordinary might be waiting. We all have a gift. The question is, will we have the courage to use it?